You sit before a mirror of polished silver, and the reflection looking back at you is not your own. It's hers, the calm, deliberate face of a woman moments away from being rewritten into history. You hear the distant echo of trumpets, the rustle of silk corridors, and the low murmur of men deciding her fate beyond the door. The air smells of beeswax, roses, and something faintly metallic like the scent of a blade waiting its turn. Every week, more of you gather here from across the world, drawn by stories buried in candlelight and stone. So, if history still feels alive to you, like breath trapped between the pages, consider subscribing. You belong in this circle. In the winter of 1502, Rome is not a city. It is a fever. Under the reign of Pope Alexander VI, the Borgias sit enthroned atop a web of power so tangled it hums with danger. Courtiers move like ghosts beneath frescoed ceilings, their silks whispering secrets to the marble floors. In one chamber of the Vatican, Lucrezia Borgia, the Pope's daughter, sits before her mirror as torches hiss outside her door. Her wedding gown glows pale gold under candlelight, and her hands, steady, practiced, smooth the cloth as though calming a creature that might bolt. The marriage to Alfonso d'Este of Ferrara is no union of hearts. It is a ledger balanced in flesh and coin. Rome demands influence. Ferrara demands papal gold. The Pope demands legitimacy for a daughter whose very existence has been made into rumor. Incest, poison, conspiracy. Her name has been passed through so many mouths that truth itself feels exhausted. But tonight, none of that matters. Tonight, Lucrezia is not a rumor. She is proof. In the hall beyond her chamber, the banquet glitters with deceit. Tables sag beneath roasted peacocks. Wine pours like rubies into crystal, and laughter trembles beneath the weight of diplomacy. The musicians play madrigals of fertility and devotion, but their eyes dart to the papal envoys standing stone still near the dais. The Este men watch too, calculating, their gazes polished to a sheen as cold as the armor at their sides. Lucrezia rises when summoned. The air shivers as her father's secretary announces her name. The guests fall silent, struck not by beauty, though she has that in abundance, but by the impossible serenity she wears like armor. When Alfonso takes her hand, his knuckles are white against the gleam of her rings. He knows the price of hesitation. She knows the cost of survival. And when the final toast is raised, to heirs, to peace between Rome and Ferrara. It is not joy that fills the hall, but command. That night, when the torches gutter low and the laughter dissolves into whispers, the ceremony is not over. The door to the bridal chamber opens not to privacy, but to witnesses. Papal clerics, Este advisors, a notary with trembling hands and an inkpot balanced on his knee. Curtains are drawn back just enough for the watchers to see shadows moving in the candlelight, to record that the union is real, that the alliance has been sealed not by word, but by flesh. What kind of civilization, one might ask, demands such proof? What kind of church writes sanctity in humiliation? Yet, for Lucrezia, there is no choice. She performs, not as victim, but as actress forced to recite lines carved by men centuries before she was born. It happens again the following night, and again a third time. For certainty, the Este envoys insist. 3 times the act becomes ritual, and the ritual becomes legend. The Borgia Protocol, they whisper later, as if naming a spell. But within the chamber, something else occurs, something no one writes down. When the candlelight trembles over her face, Lucrezia does not look at her husband or the witnesses. She looks at the mirror propped against the far wall. She watches herself, her composure, her stillness, and in that reflection begins the slow construction of defiance. She understands that this gaze meant to shame her can also be turned outward. If her body must be a stage, then she will learn to direct the play. When the final curtain falls and the watchers retreat, parchment sealed with trembling signatures, The corridors of the Vatican fall silent once more. The torches sputter out, leaving the faint trace of smoke curling toward the frescoed ceiling. Somewhere in the darkness a young woman exhales, neither broken nor whole, but remade. Outside, Rome sleeps beneath its gilded wrought. The bells toll midnight, then 1, then 2. And in the chamber, heavy with roses and wax, Lucrezia Borgia closes her eyes beneath the mirror's fading light. A bride, a witness, and the seed of something the men outside could never imagine. A woman who will learn to turn spectacle into sovereignty. The third night is over. But the story, her story, has only just begun. When Lucrezia Borgia crossed the gates of Ferrara in February of 1502, the bells did not ring for joy. They rang for curiosity. The city, dressed in frost and gossip, lined its narrow streets to glimpse the infamous bride, the Pope's daughter, the widow twice over, the woman whose name Rome uttered like both prayer and curse. The Duke's courtiers, cloaked in furs, whispered into the collars of their gowns as her procession passed. A serpent in silk, some said. A saint made of scandal, said others. But when the curtains of her litter parted and her face appeared, calm, radiant, untouchable, the murmurs thinned into silence. Ferrara, unlike Rome, prized subtlety over spectacle. Its marble shone not with papal grandeur, but with the polish of intellect. Here, poets debated theology in the language of desire. Painters and scholars dined beside princes. It was a court that smiled as it cut, one where cruelty was performed with precision, and Lucrezia understood immediately that this would be her new theater. The first act began quietly. She studied the audience before speaking her first line. The duchesses measuring her jewels. The cardinals counting the papal coin behind her dowry. The Duke himself, Alfonso d'Este, stern, pragmatic, wary. He greeted her as one might greet a loaded weapon. "Ferrara is a place of order, Madonna," he said, bowing with military stiffness. "We do not play the games of Rome." Her answer was simple, her smile disarming. "Then, perhaps, mio signore, Ferrara will find peace at last." It was a performance, but one delivered with flawless precision. She knew that her survival depended not on denial of her past, but on mastery of it. Every glance she received carried an accusation, every silence a test. Yet she never faltered. In a world where women were trained to endure, Lucrezia began to direct. Within weeks, her apartments became the pulse of Ferrara's court. What began as polite gatherings soon transformed into salons of persuasion. Poets read verses that flattered theology but echoed power. Philosophers debated Plato as servants poured candied almonds and cinnamon wine. Beneath the scent of incense and parchment, alliances took root. And at the center of it all sat the Duchess, serene, listening, her fingers absently tracing the rim of a goblet, while her mind mapped the hidden geometry of every exchange. When the courtiers mocked her behind their fans, the Borgia bride, the Vatican's daughter, the Pope's pawn, she smiled as if hearing music only she understood. When a visiting Florentine joked, "Does Ferrara not fear the poison of Rome?" she replied without looking up, "Ferrara's wine is sweeter. Perhaps it kills more kindly." The laughter that followed was uneasy, but it was hers to command. Over time, Ferrara forgot to mock. Its nobles found themselves indebted to her patronage, to her generosity, to the ease with which she made their ambitions appear as her own. She funded a convent here, a chapel there. She commissioned frescoes that shimmered with divine symbolism, but also, discreetly, her image. She turned the whispers into portraits, the scandal into art. One chronicler wrote that the Duchess of Ferrara governs with her eyes. Another, more cruel, said she ruled as one who had already survived death. Both were correct. By 1505, her transformation was complete. The same men who had once scrutinized her wedding bed now sought her counsel in state matters. Letters bearing her seal began to cross Italy, written in her distinct hand. Graceful, firm, deliberate. She corresponded with poets, diplomats, and even her father's enemies. Each letter a thread in the invisible web she wove between Rome and Ferrara. Alfonso watched her from a distance, uncertain whether to admire or to fear the woman beside him. Their marriage, once defined by obligation, settled into a wary partnership. In public, they appeared unified. In private, he read her silences like riddles. Yet even he began to understand that the city was safer in her calm than in any sword he could draw. And still, the past lingered. When a visiting envoy from Venice murmured of those 3 nights over dinner, the hall fell still. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lucrezia lifted her cup, eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Yes," she said softly, "I remember them. Rome does not forget its rituals." Then she set the goblet down, her tone light as silk. "But Ferrara," she added, "has given me better ones." The laughter that followed was nervous, scattered, but it was the envoy who blushed, not the Duchess. Through control, she dismantled her shame. Through grace, she built a throne. Her chambers glittered with gifts sent by men who once called her poison. Gifts she returned doubled in beauty and meaning, each a mirror held up to their ambition. By the decade's end, Ferrara's poets called her La Buona Duchessa, the Good Duchess. But those who had witnessed the first years knew the truth. The city had not purified her. She had transformed the city. Beneath the frescoed ceilings and perfumed courtyards, the Borgia daughter had become the mind of Ferrara, her stillness a mask worn by power itself. And when the bells of the cathedral rang one evening, echoing through the marble corridors, it was no longer curiosity they carried, but obedience. Ferrara believed it had tamed her. It did not yet know it had crowned her. By the year 1509, the echo of Rome has quieted into memory, but it still hums beneath the marble floors of Ferrara. The city no longer calls her Lucrezia Borgia with a sneer. It calls her La Buona Duchessa, the Good Duchess, a name half blessing, half confession. Yet, in the mornings when the courtyards are still pale with mist, she sometimes pauses before a mirror. The woman reflected there is composed, regal, and remote. Yet behind the calm lies something unspeakable, the faint shimmer of a memory that refuses to die. The mirror knows what the city forgets, that power was born from spectacle. When Alfonso rides to war against the French, Ferrara becomes hers. The court waits, uncertain. A duchess is meant to pray and patronize, not to govern. But Lucrezia steps into command as if she has been rehearsing for years. And in truth, she has. The same discipline that once kept her body still beneath the scrutiny of Rome now steadies her hand over parchment. She signs decrees with ink as dark as the candle smoke curling beside her. She mediates disputes, balances trade, and receives envoys with the precision of a chess player who already knows the endgame. In one of her letters, written to her father's old ally, Cardinal Riario, she writes, "One governs best when one's wounds have healed into silence." It is a sentence that could have been her creed. Ferrara thrives under her stewardship. The markets hum, the artists return, and even her husband's rivals concede her skill. Courtiers who once whispered of scandal now bow deeply, murmuring, "Your Grace," as if to atone for every jest they once dared to make. Yet for all her success, the shadow of that earlier Rome remains. When she walks through her own palazzo, she sometimes feels it breathing at her back. The rustle of silk, the hiss of torches, the unseen eyes of the watchers. She channels that memory into art. The chapels she commissions are drenched in pale golds and quiet blues, colors of forgiveness or perhaps of disguise. Painters capture her not as temptress or penitent, but as patroness, her hands open, her gaze lifted heavenward. Still, if one looks closely, the eyes in those portraits are never pleading. They are steady, almost defiant, as though aware that divinity itself is a stage, and she has learned to play it well. In one fresco, she instructs the artist to paint Saint Catherine, the virgin martyr who argued with scholars and kings before her execution. When the painter hesitates, "My lady, some might find that choice bold," she smiles faintly. "Then let them look longer," she replies. Her reign as duchess is not merely cultural. She governs with quiet force, softening the duke's harsher decrees, mediating with Rome, sheltering scholars exiled for thought deemed dangerous. She knows that her father's sins will always hover at the edge of her name, so she balances them with acts of mercy so deliberate they become legend. Every orphan housed, every convent built, every debt forgiven. All of it weaves a counter-narrative to the one written by men who preferred her scandal to her skill. Still, whispers persist. They always do. There are those who insist that her serenity is calculation, that her piety is performance. But the older she grows, the less she seems to care. "Let them speak," she tells her confessor once. "The echo makes the song endure." By 1518, her reflection begins to fade. Childbirth has taken its toll, 10 pregnancies in 17 years. Her beauty, once weapon and armor, now belongs to portraiture alone. Yet even in frailty she commands the same quiet reverence she once had in strength. When Alfonso rides to battle again, she insists on standing at the balcony to see him off, despite the pain in her legs. The wind catches her veil like a ghostly banner. The soldiers bow as they pass, murmuring her name not as gossip, but as prayer. Months later, in the spring of 1519, Ferrara gathers in the cathedral for her funeral. She is 39. The same bells that once marked her arrival now toll in mourning. The streets overflow with those who had once doubted her. Merchants, scholars, nuns, noblewomen, all filing past her coffin draped in white silk. Beneath the altar, the tomb bears only a simple inscription: Lucretia, Duchess of Ferrara, beloved of the people. It is a remarkable epitaph for a woman whose life began in rumor and ended in reverence. The witnesses of that long-ago wedding night are dust now, their records faded to myth. Yet in the paintings, in the letters, in the chapels where the candlelight still trembles across her likeness, the echo of that night endures, reshaped, reinterpreted, redeemed. And if you listen closely, in the hush of the cathedral, or in the turning of a page in some distant library, you can almost hear it, the faint applause of history correcting itself. The bed meant to expose her became a throne. The gaze that sought to consume her became her coronation. Centuries later, when travelers stand before her portrait in Ferrara's castle, the gold thread of her gown catching the light, they will not remember the scandal. They will not think of the witnesses or the parchment. They will see only the eyes, composed, knowing, luminous, and in their stillness they will understand the truth she mastered long ago, that some echoes do not fade, they reign.